Whether certain fans want to accept it or not, the current trajectory of Star Wars is trending in a very scary and dangerous direction, and the newly established canon timeline is a complete mess that has been retconned multiple times and will continue to be in upcoming projects. Not only that, but the projects that they've been releasing have continued to drum up huge amounts of unnecessary drama and controversy, and they're struggling to produce consistent quality in their content, as well as allocating huge budgets to controversial shows instead of big existing names. If some of the issues I'm about to outline are not addressed quickly and properly, Star Wars may pass the point of no return and may truly die. This video is not intended to tear down Star Wars or Disney, but instead objectively lay out the problems fans are finding. If you enjoyed this video essay, there are more on the way, including documentaries on the history of cancelled Star Wars projects, which I'm sure you'll all find very fascinating. So without further ado, let's begin. Problem 1. Canon is being dangerously ignored. This hasn't been officially acknowledged by Disney, but it's clear to see that the one canon system is dead, and that the canon tier system from the Legends continuity back in the day has snuck its way back into Star Wars, whether we want to admit it or not. Despite promising a clear, consistent, and cohesive canon where every character and story is in the same universe, it's clear that there are three different universes. The screen universe, containing everything that happens on screen, in movies, TV shows, and games. The print universe, containing everything printed, like the books and the comics. And the reference universe, which contains reference books and other similar low-tier material, which only exists until it becomes inconvenient to a big-name director or writer who choose to throw them out the window. When shows have free reign to stomp on the previously established facts just because they were written on paper and not shown on screen, we have more than enough evidence to conclude that Disney have gone against their intentions when creating the new canon back in 2014. And some of you may say that they never promised everything to be canon on the same level. Well, just as a refresher for those of you who may have forgotten or are simply unaware, this is an extract from the announcement that Disney made when they announced the new canon. Now, with an exciting future filled with new cinematic installments of Star Wars, all aspects of Star Wars storytelling moving forward will be connected. Under Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy's direction, the company will for the first time ever form a story group to oversee and coordinate all Star Wars creative development. And this is just the beginning of a creatively aligned program of Star Wars storytelling created by the collaboration of incredibly talented people, united by their love of that galaxy far, far away. Not only has there most certainly not been organized creative alignment, but the story group expressly hired to keep canon in line have repeatedly failed to do so. My question is, what do they actually do? Just as a quick recap, here are some of the most egregious contradictions in the current canon, and most of these were completely unnecessary to tell the story that they featured in. The first is the Ahsoka novel, which has been shredded to pieces. At first it was just the flashbacks, of which almost every single possible detail was contradicted by the Clone Wars Season 7. This can be seen as easy to discount since the main plot of the book was unaffected at that time, but with the release of Tales of the Jedi, the main plot of the entire novel was retconned and multiple narratives shifted or were changed entirely. This puts the novel in an area where almost none of its contents are worth reading, if you want to keep up with the canon. Not good for anyone who purchased the book, and certainly not a good look for Disney, contradicting their own story multiple times. After that, the canon comic and novel were needlessly thrown away by the first episode of The Bad Batch Season 1, despite adding nothing new to the story of the TV show. Some things like the weather, the lightsaber colors, the order of events all being incorrect can be overlooked, but the fact that Captain Styles, a deep and complex character who actually fought back against his inhibitor chip, seemingly doesn't exist anymore after The Bad Batch is pretty much unforgivable. The funniest and most insulting part of all of this is that it was so easy to avoid. Kanan played no part in The Bad Batch at all, meaning it could have been any other Jedi Master and Padawan, specifically having Kanan there who had no role other than to fulfill Dave's wishes. And even if he does play a role in future content, in The Bad Batch, maybe Season 4, which they're not going to make as of yet, it doesn't excuse his traumatic and emotional backstory being thrown away for a few minutes of screen time in one episode of a show. Now the next one isn't a direct retcon, but it was definitely a shabby bit of writing. In episode 5 of The Bad Batch, we're introduced to Muchi the Rancor, who is collected by Bib Fortuna. Most of the people who watched the episode believed it was the same one that Luke killed in Return of the Jedi, since the Aftermath novels confirmed that Bib gifted it to Jabba to gain his position as Major Domo, which led to lots of hype and speculation in the community after the episode aired. Unfortunately, the writer of the episode shot the show in the foot by saying that it was instead a completely different Rancor for absolutely no reason. He just killed all of the speculation and all of the hype for nothing. This mass confusion was later memed on in the Skywalker saga when both Rancors were condensed into just one, with the name being Patissa Muchi, a combination of both Rancor names. There are also some minor things with Cobb Vanth's backstory and Mando conflicting with the way it was established in the Aftermath novels, and Poe Dameron's confusing past as a spice runner. That's its own controversy, but let me know if you'd like to see a video on that in the future. Oh, and he also meets Rey twice in the book and the movie. Solution 1. In-universe reference books and storytelling. By far the easiest, cheapest, but maybe sloppiest way to fix this problem is to create an in-universe material that methodically patches up all of the holes and addresses all of the retcons that are being created. For example, maybe we can get a page from Kanan's journals explaining that his PTSD causes him to forget or misremember certain things surrounding his traumatic events. This would explain the Bad Batch blatantly retconning his comic, his lightsaber color, the weather on that day, and all of that type of stuff, and it would at least provide some level of explanation. And this isn't something unheard of. Even a series as popular as Naruto has dedicated data books which serve to fix retcons made from creating a weekly chapter. If Kishimoto can pull that off, so can Lucasfilm. But this also removes the argument that TV show writers should have to follow obscure lore from a reference book made 5 years ago to write their stories. If the reference books live within the universe, the character that writes the book obviously won't have all of the information available to them, explaining any inconsistencies between the two tellings of the event. Now, just these past few weeks, a book similar to this did actually come out, pretty much exactly how we described it, and Disney have actually, to their credit, done something even better than what I described. They hired a real-world historian to write an in-universe Star Wars novel in which a historian breaks down the rise and fall of Palpatine's empire, called The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. The book has various parts which clearly state what I've mentioned here, such as some information being lost to time, some things not yet fully researched, and so on. This perfectly solves retcons, and we need to support this work if we want to see more like it. So please go buy this book if you care about canon. Solution 2. Striking out retcon material. As sad as it would be to remove some of the fantastic stories written over the years, some of the contradictions are simply irreconcilable with the content produced afterwards. These few works that have been so severely damaged should either be completely struck from the canon timeline, or at least be printed with a label that represents their troubled status in the continuity. Solution 3. Separate timelines. A messy solution that would still support the sale of retcon material would be to create a single alternate canon wherein certain events happen differently. This would lend itself to immense creativity to whoever takes on the project, since all of the major events in the movies could be retold entirely differently and could make Disney money through the sales of dedicated alternate banner books, similar to how they presently display the Legends banner on many books. However, obviously this is far from ideal, and this is only one method. Solution 4. In-universe legends. Disney has already tried their hands at in-universe fairy tales, with the best examples being the Legends of Luke Skywalker and Myths and Fables, books dedicated to one-off stories heard in cantinas or small villages across the galaxy, which may or may not have actually happened. They can take this established in-universe storytelling format and apply it to retcons to make them feel more like intentionally crafted fables about legendary characters rather than silly mistakes from paid professionals. Solution 5. Printed materials need to be treated as big events. Now, not everyone may agree with this, but when big events happen in the comics or the books, they should have a higher level of marketing and hype generated on Twitter and other social media platforms. To reinforce that, the events should then be referenced in an upcoming TV show, game, or movie, no matter how small the reference is. An example of where this opportunity was horribly missed was with the War of the Bounty Hunters event in the comics and the Book of Boba Fett. War of the Bounty Hunters was a large-scale, fun, and interesting crossover event, and it closely covered the events relating to the character of Boba Fett, who, funnily enough, happened to be getting a show a few weeks after the comics dropped. If the War of the Bounty Hunters event was marketed and then later tied into the Book of Boba Fett, you would skyrocket sales from the comics, make fans feel more rewarded for engaging with external material, and it would be a viable growth strategy for future content. Problem 2. The worrying lack of diverse content for many types of Star Wars fans. If you're a fan of Disney Star Wars, you get books, comics, shows, and games set in a range of eras. If you're a Legends fan, you get the occasional reprints of old content, updates from a dying MMORPG set in one era of time, and nothing else. That's all the Legends fans have. In 2021, they had a sliver of hope at receiving new content when a cancelled Legends book was leaked and illegally made available to the public on Amazon. But within days, Disney rightfully ended the illicit operation, but have been entirely silent on ever acknowledging the releasing of that novel. Bear in mind that this particular story was personally commissioned by George Lucas himself, Heart of the Jedi, who was a fan of the author's prior work. If there was anything that should have seen the light of day, it was this book, and the fact that its illegal listing rocketed to the top of Amazon's best-selling Star Wars section should be a clear sign to Disney that there is a huge demand for Legends content, and yet they seem not to care. Solution 1. Officially reinstate Legends as an ongoing story separate from the main timeline. I'm not saying Legends needs to take over as the main Star Wars content. Actually, I don't think it should even get half of the budget. But regardless of how small the budget is and how few people they hire, there are still great stories left to be told in the Star Wars Legends continuity, and all of it would bring easy money from the countless fans who have felt left out up until this point with the new canon. Heart of the Jedi was the perfect testing ground to see if Legends fans' infamous passion was still burning strong after almost a decade, after their timeline was ended, and the results were a resounding yes. Solution 2. Allow authors who were working on storylines pre-buyout to complete their work and have small spin-offs. If successful, Disney can can then use the revenue to revitalize Legends on a larger scale and tell more stories. Not only through books and comics, but instead put a deeper investment through maybe even an animated show, which would only serve to generate even more revenue from the casual and hardcore fans alike who might not care about what is canon versus what is Legends. It's free money waiting to be made. Some of these books are fully complete and sitting in the Lucasfilm archives ready to publish. I literally can't think of a better way to reignite the Legends timeline than to release these at no extra cost. Other than, of course, the mortal wound it would deal to Lucasfilm's pride. Problem 3. The magic is gone. No matter what your thoughts are on the sequel trilogy movies, nobody can deny that while they were coming out, there was a magic that consisted of hype, speculation and theory crafting which surrounded each release. Or at the very least the first two. Maybe not so much by the time of the final installment, but Star Wars YouTube was booming. Some of the biggest channels in the community built their platforms off of that hype. The Star Wars creator economy is dying as a knock-on effect to the lack of hype and speculation around any new releases, and that's something Disney cannot afford to lose. So how can they get that magic back? Solution 1. Take lessons from The Mandalorian. Even if you're dreading the fact that all roads in The Mandalorian lead to the sequel trilogy, the mystery and intrigue surrounding the Snoke clones, Grogu, midichlorians, and Mount Tantus is a step in the right direction towards restoring that hype and magic. When a show like Mando airs, everyone on social media is diving into theories, feeding on and growing the hype, and it leads fans to further buy into the Star Wars universe's storytelling. If Star Wars could do this more often like the MCU, we might actually be incredibly close to getting back to the days of the sequel trilogy hype. If you guys were around back then, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was absolutely wild. Problem 4. The sorry state of Star Wars games. Disney has done an abysmal job of handling the Star Wars license when it comes to video games. That shouldn't be a controversial statement whatsoever. Their decision to hand the license to EA exclusively was purely driven by their immediate need of funds to recuperate their huge investment into the Star Wars franchise. This move was not only incredibly greedy, but it has done irreparable damage to both the brand as a whole and on a much deeper level, the Star Wars gaming community. If Disney had spent even a second thinking long term, they would have only given EA regular publishing rights and not exclusivity. In the almost decade that Disney has owned Star Wars, we've been given less than 24 complete games, the overwhelming majority of which are mobile ones, removed from the app stores, and only a handful of these titles were made for home consoles. Even then, there was a fiery debate about whether or not any of these are actually good, with Vader Immortal and Fallen Order being the only ones that have had mostly positive feedback since their launches. Although Jedi Survivor has a great story, the game has had one of the most negative launches in the past decade, with it still to this day being unplayable on PC. Video games were a huge part of Star Wars being able to stay relevant towards the end of Lucas's ownership over the franchise after the prequel trilogy's end. For almost an entire decade, the games fueled the fandom, and when paired with the Legends novels of the time, they completely carried the Star Wars franchise and kept it in the mainstream. Solution 1. Do it the LucasArts way. LucasArts worked with countless studios, small and large, to deliver hundreds of Star Wars games. Were they all good? No. But some of the best remembered and beloved games in the entire history of video gaming came out from the LucasArts method. I'd rather have 10 strange games and 2 great games in 1 year than 5 mediocre ones in 10 years. But hey, that's just me. Others may disagree and that's fine, but at the end of the day, the more chances you take on people, the higher chances you have of finding success, and when it comes to video games, you can't expect the best return on investment when you barely have a new product out in the public's hands every couple of years. Solution 2. Just handle your license with the tiniest shred of logic. Out of the few upcoming games which at least have some people hyped for, like Outlaws and Eclipse if that ever gets made, we've had basically nothing worth gossiping about. Although it's getting good reviews now, Star Wars Hunters had a really troubled early access which lasted years, more than it was intended to, and other projects have gone silent entirely. The KOTOR remake is suffering immense development issues and setbacks thanks to the decision to hire a porting studio for a next generation from the ground up remake. Though there are rumors that the parent company handed the project to another studio, the game was in very early development and will still not be released until many years in the future. But it's unlikely that its new development cycle will be a flawless run with no setbacks, making us wait even longer to get the game in our hands. Star Wars Eclipse is also already in deep trouble as its developers, Quantic Dream, are struggling to hire the staff needed to have the game created in time to meet its original expected release of 2025. That ain't happening. Some insider reports hint that it's closer to a 2027 release due to the insane staff shortages, and the game is also encountering controversy among fans due to allegations against the founder of Quantic Dream. When the first reaction Lucasfilm and Sony have to being shown a demo for the KOTOR game is to immediately fire the lead designers and halt production, something has gone horribly wrong. Seriously Disney, you get out of one headache with EA, then you waltz straight into this one? This has to be some of the worst license management in video gaming history. A huge fall from the days of LucasArts making some of the most beloved video games of all time. Problem 5. The rapidly deteriorating quality of writing. When you're trying to create an interesting, engaging and fresh story, you typically want to have a good and talented writer at the helm. A big issue for Star Wars right now is that this simply is not the case. Dave Filoni is perhaps the best example of this. Although his work is praised by the crowd, the cracks have begun to show more recently. And look, you can love what he does for the fandom, but at the end of the day, his actual writing chops just haven't proven to be up there with the greats, and that should not be controversial to say. There are multiple videos from writers methodically tearing down Dave's rookie mistakes one at a time, and to be perfectly clear, these videos don't seek to attack him or anything like that. They just exist as a way to say, hey Dave, you made a pretty big mistake here, and it leaves the story incomplete. Not to mention that he also just bulldozes and flattens every story that has come before him if it doesn't fit with the story he wants to tell in the future. He doesn't have respect for canon, which is fine. However, we can't pretend to still have a one canon system if one author can consistently overwrite that. Solution 1. Get Dave a team of incredibly experienced and knowledgeable assistants. The easiest way to remedy this while still having the fan favorite creator in his position is to hire a team of assistants whose entire job it is to look at his writing, improve it, and ensure that it lines up with the things he himself has already established, then have the story group look over his work before it's even accepted as a draft. Chief among these assistants should be Leland Chee, the keeper of the holocron. For those of you who don't know, Leland Chee is the Lucasfilm expert on matters concerning continuity and story, compiling a huge database of over 200,000 canon and legends articles. Many of the contradictions that exist in the current canon would likely not have made it through the scrutiny by Leland Chee. Solution 2. Instead of having one man, or two if we include Favreau, rule all, have a dedicated team leading the charge in writing and creation. Other than the assistant recommendation earlier, the only alternative is to have a sort of roundtable of experienced and beloved writers who need their writing passed through each other before it's allowed to hit the screens. This not only prevents retcons, since the heads will have complete communication at all times on all major projects, but also allow people with a unique set of eyes to look at scripts or ideas and say, hey, have you thought this through? I don't think it sounds complete. Obviously no team is perfect, but it would heavily improve the overall quality of storytelling rather than leaving Dave to his own devices. Of course, I would like to reiterate that none of these are perfect ways to move forward with the franchise, nor am I trying to say I know better than the billion-dollar corporation, but when even your most dedicated fans take issues with some of the things you're pulling, something's gone wrong and needs to be fixed. I hope that regardless that the method they use, Disney will succeed in turning around what appears to be the slow death of Star Wars' infamous storytelling and revitalize it so that it can be loved and appreciated for decades to come, just as it did before the buyout. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you love this documentary and want to see more, there will be plenty more on the way, so make sure you hit that sub button, and I'll see you in the next video. If you made it this far, drop a thank Mr. Leland in the comments down below.